aggressive sometimes toward one another, but please never ever lose that element of respect toward one another. That's what elevates debate to simple common street argument. Okay? Having said that, are there any questions from the competitors? Great. Seeing none. I will now call this Congress to order. Is there a docket that has been proposed? Representative Goldberg.
I'd like to propose the following docket.
Yes.
Bill 101, Bill 201, Bill 301.
Okay. And we'll also keep track of pro and con speakers up here for your reference. All right, is there a second to the docket?
Second.
Okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
So moved. Okay. We will now move immediately then to Bill 101. I will waive the reading of the bill because that would be ridiculous. Okay. I will now call upon a sponsorship speaker since we have no authorship speaker. Sponsors, please rise. Okay. Sometimes it may take me a while here. And again, I have my randomized seating chart. By randomized seating chart, Representative Goldberg, you will have the sponsorship. All right.
I think the chair.
By the way, I will tap at 2:30, 2:45, and 3. I will start aggressively tapping at 3:05. Please respect the time of the Congress as well as other people.
I'd like to thank the chair and the computer that gave me the randomized number. With that, the leisure of my legion of judges, my presiding officer. All right. We're about to sit and debate for about an hour over Bitcoin. And everyone, be they on the pro side of the debate or the con side, is going to tell you one of many things. They may say that we're going to be able to raise a lot of revenue by taxing Bitcoins. They're going to say there's no way to possibly track Bitcoins because they are a cryptocurrency that preserves anonymity. However, anyone that says anything with any definitiveness about a Bitcoin is completely wrong. And it is for that specific reason that we need to pass this bill. Because, for one, the potential for Bitcoins to do good definitely exists. And that, two, we are able to at least observe them, which is exactly what this bill proposes and exactly what we need to do. So for that reason, I urge for you to pass today's legislation. Now, for my first point that we need to pass this bill, I'd like to point you to an article from the Wall Street Journal in 2014. Before I get into that, I'd like to point out what this bill actually tries to do. This bill does not necessarily say outright, we're going to tax Bitcoin, because quite frankly, that would be absurd. As the con side is going to say, we don't necessarily know whether or not Bitcoins are going to be a profitable revenue for us to tax, but that's where my evidence comes in, which again, Wall Street Journal 2014. It says that Ben Bernanke, ex-Fed chair, says that the potential for Bitcoins to raise revenue, that the potential for Bitcoins to be a new type of international-based currency is enormous. And now once we look back at what this bill attempts to do, for us to study the Bitcoins, find out how they function, find out what different potentials that we could take advantage of as a country, is something that has the potential to be incredibly beneficial to us. Any harm that anyone in negation says today about the possible effects of Bitcoin can be completely ignored because we're going to, with this legislation, be discovering that harm. We would not be accepting that harm because we are not taxing Bitcoins or anything else that they may propose. All we're doing is investigating them. Which brings me to my second point, that the Bitcoins can actually be traced and investigated, maybe not from individuals to individuals, but as a whole. Because according to The Guardian in 2013, it says that, for example, Germany now allows for Bitcoins to be used in private transactions, and an American judge in New York ruled that Bitcoins can be used as a legal currency. So, what this is, and the importance and significance behind this, is that we are seeing countries all throughout the world recognizing that Bitcoins are at least valuable in some sense as a currency. As to the extent of this usefulness, I don't know, and I'm not going to pretend I know, but that is exactly why we need this legislation. So, I'd just like to reiterate, anyone that says they know anything about Bitcoins is wrong. The purpose of this legislation is not to do anything specifically with Bitcoins at this time. It is to address the avenues that we can possibly take in the future to benefit our country and the world. And it is for those two reasons that I urge you to pass this bill and stare at a bit of coin. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. 2 minutes and 56 seconds. Before a question is raised, just a reminder that questions and finals will be exactly like questions and semis, which is to say 2 of you will get a chance to ask a question. When I tap the gavel at 30 seconds, please, whoever is speaking, if you could just stop speaking so that we can move to the next question. Okay, and I will try to balance the questions as best I can. Having said that, questioners, please rise. Okay, Representative, is it Zients?
Yes.
And Miller.
You are fully aware that cryptocurrencies are often used for illegal activities such as the purchasing of drugs or other illegal substances.
Oh, indeed I am, and that's one of the harms that is definitely associated with this currency. However, if we are ever going to try to mitigate that, and I do believe as a country we have a role to mitigate the damage that go on within our world, we at least have to find out how Bitcoins work before we try to attack the
Okay,
problem.
so you are willing to allow us another period of time to be able to continually buy and purchase illegal substances that are harming other human
By
beings?
filling this bill, we do the same. At least with this, we begin to take a step forward to regulate.
Take a step to actually ban the currencies that are continually being used for illegal?
Well,
Representative, is Bitcoin an international currency?
Bitcoin is, yes, an international cryptocurrency that we at least would be able to study to try to find out whether or not we would use within the
So if
country.
Bitcoin is an international currency, what gives the United States the power to regulate it without international cooperation?
Well, right now we're not even necessarily regulating it. All that this bill does is observe it and possibly track the transactions that occur with it.
But what use would any investigation be without international cooperation with what we decide to do?
We are allowed to tax currencies and tax trade that occurs in different currencies. The world does not revolve around the dollar, Representative.
Representative, because
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome. Con speakers, please rise. Are you in your spot, by the way? Okay. Let me just, I need to draw a line here so that I can make sure I understand. Okay. And by preference, Representative Hernandez, you have the floor.
Representative Goldberg came up here and stated that the speakers in negation know nothing at all about Bitcoin. Now, I don't really know how to react to that statement, Representative Goldberg, whether it be personal or whether you're just offending everybody. But representatives, what we need to be seeing is that, yes, not that many people know about Bitcoin or its functions, but we see that today's legislation is not the way to go to regulate and find harms. Now we see that two different solutions can be made instead of today's legislation. The first being on how we can regulate Bitcoin, but taking into account the nations that are currently relying on the black market. And second, looking at how we need to be looking at the root of the problem of today's legislation. But first, looking at how, by the passage of this legislation, we are going to be harming many countries' GDPs. In fact, even our own. I turned to the Personal Finance on March 19th of 2014. They stated that currently Argentina and Nicaragua are nations that heavily rely on their black market. Representative Goldberg came up here and stated that we know nothing about the harms in Bitcoin and that through the passage of this legislation, we are finding out those harms. But that's not the issue, Representative. We already know the harms. We need to be solving them. And what we're noticing is that in Nicaragua and Argentina, they are relying on their black market, which is fluctuated through Bitcoin. In fact, even our own economy is also fluctuated with Bitcoin. According to USA Today, on February 15th of 2014, they stated that currently 6.64% of our GDP relies on the black market. Representative Goldberg, this legislation is meant to be focused on the black market, how the Bitcoin works in the black market. By regulating Bitcoin, we are ensuring that Bitcoin is eventually going to be falling down in value, thus the black market is going to be falling down, thus many economies. Second, let's look at how we need to be looking at another form of legislation. That being that we need to be solving the root of the problem. As I've stated, the black market. According to the Smithsonian or George Mason University, they stated that currently with Bitcoin, it is clustering the markets of many black markets. Now, Representative Goldberg, you stated that many negation speakers are going to come up here and talk about how we can't track down all Bitcoin. And I have to reiterate that. We cannot track down all Bitcoin and we cannot regulate it. We need to be solving the black market crisis, and thus be solving all the issues that are associated with Bitcoin. So in conclusion, we see that we must be voting in the negation because of my past two contentions. That one, with this piece of legislation, we are harming the black market and thus our economy. And second, we notice how by ignoring the black market, we're completely ignoring the root of the problem.
Thank you, Representative. 3 minutes and 2 seconds. Questioners, please rise. Representative Goldberg and Ursman.
Thank you. You said the black market fluctuates largely with bitcoins, then you said bitcoins can't be tracked. How could we successfully address the black market?
We have successfully addressed the black market because obviously the black market does output its revenue, and we flip the black market.
If you successfully address the black market, then why does it occur so prevalently in South America and within the United States, as you said in your speech?
Representative, obviously we haven't solved the issues going on with the black market. That's what I'm suggesting, that we solve those issues before tackling Bitcoin.
So would you agree that we should investigate those issues?
I'm suggesting that we investigate the black market.
Thank you. Representative, you stated that this bill would harm the black market. Please tell me, are legal or illegal goods sold on the black market?
Illegal.
Illegal.
Yes.
So why would it be a bad thing if the black market was hurt? These items are obviously illegal for a reason, so if Bitcoin is used to purchase those items, why would it be a bad thing that the drug trade would decrease in terms of quantity sold?
Representative, I'm not saying that the black market is good. Definitely
You
not.
did say...
No, what I'm saying, Representative, is that the black market heavily relies on Bitcoin, and currently the black market constitutes a lot of the economy.
Thank you, Representative. Pro speakers, please rise. And Representative Ursman.
I thank the chair.
The chair is welcome.
That's Representative Urisman, speaking for the first time today. Urisman. I stand at the leisure of all those above me. I understand that there's a lot of tension in this room. Just give me a look of real pressure when you're ready. I fear that in this debate, what's going to be lost is the real reason as to why Bitcoin was established. It was established originally as a fringe currency to challenge the established order and to tell all currencies, domestic, international, that there's a new player on the block. That the idea of Bitcoins is that there can be a people-driven currency. And Bitcoins, whether we want to admit it or not, have been extraordinarily successful. But what we have to understand is that because we need to legitimize Bitcoins, and because we need to make sure to prevent consumer fraud, we need to pass this bill. This is the real crux of the debate. That the World Wide Web does not have to be the wild, wild west. On to my first contention is that passing this resolution in effect legitimizes an actual legitimate currency. According to Peter Henning of the New York Times on February 3rd of 2014, quote, much as the SEC and CTFC regulate stock and futures exchanges, government regulators may require controlling the virtual currencies in the market so it's less susceptible to manipulation. This is a short step from treating from firms that trade in virtual currencies to firms that trade in stocks and commodities, which are also subject to extensive disclosure and capital requirements. So we've seen Bitcoins proliferate in our society. We've seen restaurants start accepting this. We've seen the proliferation of websites like the Silk Road. Bitcoins are a legitimate currency, and we need to bring them out into the light and recognize them as such. Allowing government regulators to step in and establish markets to trade Bitcoins, allowing us to close down the wild, wild west, if you will, and establish some order, would legitimize an actual mainstream currency. That's my second point, is that there is a level of consumer fraud with respect to Bitcoins. I turned to a USA Today article from March 4th, 2014, that 1 week after the popular Bitcoin exchange Mt. Gox mysteriously shut down, another exchange is also ceasing trading after an attack by hackers. The second exchange, was called Flexicoin, said it was robbed of 896 of its Bitcoins. Based on today's determined value, that's about over $600,000. The first exchange, Mt. Gox, lost over $425 million in Bitcoins from hackers. It makes sense that you have organizations like the FTC step in, as well as the SEC step in, if a payday loan lender or a bank is being predatory towards its consumers or ripping their consumers off. We see that every single day when congressmen come up and attack regulators for protecting consumers in the name of crusading for consumer rights. It only makes sense that we come up here and we advocate that anybody who uses Bitcoins gets the same consumer rights as anybody who goes to a payday loan place, anybody who goes to a regular bank to get a loan. It makes sense to legitimize Bitcoins because not only is there consumer fraud in the Bitcoin market, but because it is in fact a legitimate currency. I urge an affirmative vote and stand open for questioning.
Thank you, Representative. 2 minutes and 53 seconds. Questioners, please rise. Representative Gleiser and Zhang.
What happened to all the money that was taken away from fraud and malpractice?
So Mt. Gox hackers, it hasn't been traced back to who specifically, stole about $425 million worth of Bitcoins.
But when you steal the money, how much can you transfer that over to other countries when it comes to currencies, though?
So when it comes to currencies, I think that what the hackers might do is they might want to start selling off their Bitcoins very slowly so that
But
it
how do
won't
they sell it
depreciate.
off? Not every country acknowledges Bitcoins then.
Because there are certain exchanges that do convert Bitcoins to money. You had, in fact, exchanges that did that exactly. 2 of them did shut down, Representative.
How will the Fed be able to regulate this?
The Fed, not specifically, but the SEC might be able to delegate certain regulations to the New York Supervisor of Financial Institutions, as well as implement its own regulations on currency exchanges.
Will they really be able to do that with how much cryptocurrencies fluctuate?
Cryptocurrencies do fluctuate on a level a lot higher than more traditional currencies like the euro or the United States dollar, but all of those currencies fluctuate just as much
But
as
how can we
Bitcoin.
implement a unified stable policy to regulate this?
We're arguing about a policy.
Thank you, Representative, very much.
I thank the chair.
Con speakers, please rise. Representative Niersbach.
I think it's time Representative Goldberg and Representative Ursman learned a bit about Bitcoin. Because when you analyze the actual aspects of passing today's legislation, do we find out that not only is it completely unfeasible to do so, but finally, we have to understand that it only brings in harms that by not regulating this currency, we can avoid. So for the following 2 contentions, I urge a negative ballot. Now to begin, Representative, something that the affirmation is failed to acknowledge that currently is although you can regulate the use of Bitcoins in an economy, you cannot regulate the currency itself, which is why it is a detriment and we must negate. According to USA Today, February 27, 2014, the Federal Reserve Chair Janet Yellen told senators Thursday that the central bank cannot regulate troubled digital currency Bitcoin because it operates outside the banking system. Representatives, this is not a currency of the United States, it is a currency of international proportions. And therefore, in order to regulate it, it must be regulated like some. We cannot have unilateral domestic policy affecting this currency because it is not used in just the United States, but abroad. And we have to understand, Representative Goldberg, although you said that New York said that they would accept the currency, they still cannot regulate it. And we need to be clear that there's a difference between using a currency and regulating the currency. Although it might be fair to use this currency at your own risk, which has been addressed by the negation, we have to see that it's completely unfeasible to regulate the currency as a whole, and therefore we must negate because this bill is unneeded. Now secondly, Representatives, now that we see that it is impossible to regulate this currency, we have to see that by trying to create policy to regulate the use of it, we have to understand we bring harms into our economy that we were seeking not to have in the first place, which is another point of contention of why we must negate. According to Chicago Tribune, February 38, 2014, in a letter this week to Treasury Secretary Jack Lau, the U.S. Senator Joe Manchin pushed for a ban on Bitcoin. This virtual currency, he stated, is unstable and unregulated and has allowed for the participants to use illicit activity while being unstable and disruptive to our economy at the same time. Representatives, this bill drives the black market as brought up in previous speakers' speeches. And we have to understand that not only is it unstable, but it is currently unregulated. However, we have to understand, Representative Goldberg, that there is incredible potential for Bitcoin. However, this potential is only negative because when we try to regulate this currency, we see now we have to regulate a black market and the instability that can only hurt us economically. And Representative Ursman, you talked about
how important it is to fuel and stop the corruption that is the Bitcoin and why we need to regulate it. However, this resolution only brings that currency into our hands because now we have to deal with it. Representatives, this bill is completely unfeasible and unwanted in terms of our economic policy, and I urge you to vote in negation of today's legislation.
Thank you, Representative. 2 minutes and 55 seconds. Questioners, please rise. Let's see. Representative Ranjanani? Yes, that. And Representative Goldberg. Thank you.
Representative, you yourself mentioned that the Bitcoin is unstable, so then why should Congress assess the Bitcoin to truly determine how it could be useful?
Although we can assess it, it is impossible to regulate it because it's not tied to the Federal Reserve of the United States. We cannot regulate the currency as a whole. It needs to be an international body.
And tell me, what is the harm in assessing this currency?
There's no harm in assessing the currency, although Representative.
And we can gain information about the Bitcoin, then why should we?
Representative, we can study this. We can study the currency without the need of a legislation to say so. The currency is on the open market, and we can research it, but we can't regulate.
So it's impossible to regulate an international currency?
Yes, Representative.
How is the euro regulated?
The euro is regulated by a body within the EU. However, this is a digital currency securely. It is not used by hand. So the means of the use of this currency is strictly online, which is why it cannot be regulated. Because although the euro is tied to a central bank, this currency is not.
Okay, thank you. Now, considering that the United States is able to use the value of the dollar to place an external pressure on other currencies, couldn't we do the same thing with the Bitcoin, regardless of the domain in which it exists?
All right, pro speakers, please rise. The generator says, is it Waldera?
Yes.
Representative Waldera.
Thank you. That's Representative Waldera, and as always, I stand in the leader of all those above me, my judges, presiding officer, Team Chamber. Any indication when you're ready? Representatives Goldberg and Urisman, by no means am I denying that there are risks and negative consequences that can be seen with Bitcoin. However, you on the other hand cannot deny that this currency has potential. And because we need to investigate this currency in order to regulate it, and we need to regulate it in order to enforce our own laws, and Bitcoin has potential to be a very productive and efficient international currency, we must see that when we look at the effects that this bill can have on our economy, the only vote we can cast is one in the affirmation. So first, let's look at why we need to be able to regulate Bitcoin. Now, according to the Huffington Post, in May 19th of 2013, it said that even as Congress debates gun safety legislation, a flourishing new virtual currency could provide a way around new restrictions by enabling people to buy guns online almost anonymously. Bitcoin makes it easier for people to buy weapons online without detailed records of those transactions, potentially bypassing new rules put in place by lawmakers to track firearm sales. Bitcoin transactions are nearly untraceable, as Representative Goldberg first brought up to us, making them the preferred currency of some online gun dealers. So, Representative Miesbach and Representative Miller, you stress the concern that Bitcoin is an international currency, so we don't have the right to regulate it. However, when it is being used to violate our own laws, that is when we receive the right to begin to regulate Bitcoin, representatives. Right now, people are bypassing the gun laws that we are putting in place, and because we need to pass this bill to research Bitcoin more thoroughly, to regulate it, we will see that that is the only way that we can properly enforce our laws, which will ultimately keep our constituents safe. Now, secondly, let's look at the potential that Bitcoin could have on the international scale. Now, according to New York Magazine on November 21st of 2013, it says that Bitcoin needs to focus on becoming an invisible man-made for the global payment system, which is currently way too expensive and outmoded. This is where Bitcoin could be incredibly useful. Imagine using Bitcoin as the invisible middle layer in a cross-border transaction. You'd ask a bank to send $1,000 to your friend in Japan, and immediately your bank would convert your US dollars into Bitcoin, place the Bitcoin into a secure virtual wallet, and send it to a Bitcoin wallet held by the Japanese bank, which would then convert it into the local currency. what we can see is that Bitcoin has the potential to be an extremely efficient and effective international currency translator. Right now, there's so many middlemen and steps that we need to take in order to transfer currency. This could help the international market. And for the fears of Representative Miller and Niersbach that say we don't have the authority to do this, I say, why can we not pass this bill to implement the first step towards researching and regulating Bitcoin so we can be the first step to a multilateral approach? So representatives, what we can see is that we need to regulate Bitcoin to enforce our own laws to keep our constituents safe. And because Bitcoin can have unlimited potential, we must explore these possibilities and pass this legislation as the first step to an effective multilateral approach. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. 3 minutes and 2 seconds. Questioners, please rise. Representative Feltus and Robbie.
No. As Representative Niersbach said, if the Fed simply can't regulate it, they've already looked into it and they can't regulate it, what's the point of this bill?
Because this allocates more research and we're using the NSA as well as several other agencies and we're giving them the means to see if we can regulate it.
But if the Fed, whose job is to look into this thing, said basically they can't regulate it, then how will we ever fix that problem?
Where did the Fed say that they cannot regulate it?
Representative Niersbach brought it up.
Well, if the Fed and the NSA, coupled with these approaches and at the beginning of a multilateral approach, can lead to exploring more potential benefits.
How do you determine the value of a Bitcoin?
I'm unaware.
It's a fiat currency, so it's a faith-based currency. So how do you control the faith of consumers in any currency?
Well, how do you control the faith in the gold standard right now?
We don't run on a gold standard. So how do you control the faith in the Bitcoin?
That's irrelevant because in order for these international transactions to take place, the currency would only be in the Bitcoin for a fraction of a second.
But we're trying to regulate it. So if we're going to regulate it, we have to regulate the fiat system. So how do you impose that faith?
Thank you, Representative. Let me remind speakers and questioners that questioners are asking the questions and speakers should be answering the questions and not vice versa. Thank you very much. You guys are off to a great start. Keep it up. Time now for a 3-minute con speech. Speakers, please rise. Representative Hassanein. Thank you. You're welcome.
Judges, just give me a nod when you're ready. That's Representative Hassanein. So far in today's debates, we've only heard arguments from the affirmation supporting the Bitcoin and how it's going to affect the future. How the potential of the Bitcoin can be unrealistic and how it can skyrocket our economy. How the Bitcoin should be treated just like any other currency. As well as the fact that the Bitcoin can make massive profits for the United States. But not one single representative brought up how the Bitcoin is going to affect us, the consumers, those running businesses, and which is why exactly what we must negate today's piece of legislation for those 2 reasons. First, being it's going to drastically hurt our constituents, and the second being that our businesses aren't going to like these cryptocurrencies. Let's negate. So first, let's discuss how detrimental these cryptocurrencies can be to our consumers. Now, I'm honestly surprised that this argument hasn't been brought up, because it's one of the most basic that should be more elaborated on. Now, I can quote from Paul Krugman on February 2nd, 2013, when he's comparing what the Bitcoin is compared to actual currency. Now, when he's talking about gold, Mr. Krugman is stating that gold actually has physical uses. It contains value because people value it as worthy, people can sell it, and it's made into jewelry, high profitable goods. But when we're talking about Bitcoin, it's only a string of numbers, fake gold that should not be actually considered any type of currency. Now, Representative Goldberg, in your speech you mentioned how much Bitcoin should be considered a currency because of the high potential that it has. I would agree with you. Bitcoin has a high potential. A high potential to fail just like it did in December. Now, in December, Bitcoin dropped over $400 overnight, essentially. Now, we don't want these currencies to be affecting our constituents, because what's going to happen if we pass today's piece of legislation is more and more of our constituents are going to feel that it's okay to invest in Bitcoin, like it's a safe product, which this couldn't be farther from the truth. If more constituents invest in Bitcoin, they're putting their assets at risk, and if Bitcoin drops again like it did in December, all of our constituents could be in danger, Representative Goldberg. Now, not only that, but Representative Walverna, you spoke of the efficiency of the currency. But the same thing, if Bitcoin can easily crash overnight, how efficient of a currency is it truly? Next, let's talk about how exactly this Bitcoin is going to affect our businesses and not just our consumers. Now, we can see from Forbes on November 30th, 2013, when it discusses Bitcoin and how it has many different counterparts. Other Bitcoin-esque currencies like Mastercoin, which hopes to mirror the success Bitcoin originally did. Now, the problem with all of these cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin alike is that it's going to definitely harm consumers, like I spoke about in my first point, but as well as businesses, because they're not going to want to accept them. As I previously spoke about the volatility of all these different currencies, no business is going to accept these currencies knowing that they can drop in an instant. Now, Representative Ersman, you stated that we should treat Bitcoin just like any loan-day store, but because it has so much more of a danger, we should negate. So speakers, previous and in the future, let's realize the potential of Bitcoin. Let's realize that the potential is negative. Let's negate today's piece of legislation to make a safer America.
Representative, 3 minutes and 5 seconds. Questioners, please rise. Representative Cajotes and Ersman.
If, as you said in your second contention, no business is going to accept Bitcoin, then what's the harm in passing this legislation?
Because I'm sure some businesses will accept Bitcoin. But when they do accept Bitcoin, if they get paid in Bitcoin, those drops or those currencies could drop, thus hurting the businesses.
You believe that our businesses aren't intelligent enough to realize that these currencies can drop and that it wouldn't be necessarily a great thing to tie themselves to?
Tell that to Overstock.com, which currently accepts Bitcoin and has probably lost profits because of it.
Is Overstock representative the entirety of the businesses in the United States?
No, but I'm sure many businesses
Thank you.
will fall.
Representative, you made a large claim that you don't want your constituents seeing their assets depreciate. If you don't want your constituents speculating in risky products, should we just ban the entire stock market?
No, because the stock market has substance in which if you're investing in Apple, you're investing in their products. If you're investing in Bitcoin, you're only investing in the demand of Bitcoin.
What about investing in money markets, especially in currencies that don't have any sort of physical backing?
Again, those have a physical backing. The euro, you're backing into the Central Bank of Europe. If you're backing into Bitcoin, there is nothing regulating it, which is, again, why we should fail.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Pro speakers, please rise. Representative Feltus, unopposed.
For the judges, that's Representative Feltus. Yeah, nod. Representatives, Bitcoins, hailed as the currency of the future, an unregulated online currency that can be used by anyone, anywhere. The negation has talked about the harms, the overall downsides of this currency. But we have to see, representatives, that through regulation, these are null and void. That in fact, Bitcoins do have problems. They can be regulated. And overall, we'll see the stabilization and growth of this currency through these policies. Now, representatives, as it stands, Bitcoins are used in illegal transactions. No one's really dealt with what these transactions are. Well, according to The Guardian on September 5th in 2013, in December of 2012, the HSBC chose to accept a $1.9 billion fine from U.S. regulatory agencies rather than face prosecution, for they found that they had a blatant failure in implementing anti-money laundering controls and allowed Mexican drug cartels and terrorists to funnel money through their bank. That, representatives, is what's happening with Bitcoins right now. Terrorists are smuggling funds in the United States. Drug cartels are using it to support their drugs. And we need to see that this is a problem that needs to be fixed. So how do we fix it? Well, regulation. Representative Niersbach brought up a great point where the Federal Reserve said that they couldn't regulate the currency. But if you look farther into this evidence, it actually goes on to say that that's because there's not enough regulation in place. According to Reuters on February 27, 2014, the U.S. Federal Reserve Chair, Janet Yellen, said that the Fed had no jurisdiction over Bitcoin. But with Congress's regulation, they can consider implementing steps. Basically, representatives, what needs to happen is Congress needs to put down a regulatory basis upon which the Fed can then act. So yes, as it stands, representatives, the Federal Reserve has no jurisdiction. They can't do anything. But with this bill, they will be able to. Now, representatives, I'd like to bring up the point that Representative Hosny brought up, that this currency is unstable and dangerous, and that's why we shouldn't support it. But the truth is, with the government regulation and with our support, this will no longer be the case. The currency will stabilize. According to Joe Nokirsa from the New York Times in February 28, 2014, however angry we might be at bank compensation or the role of financial institutions in the financial crisis, we must trust banks to safeguard our money, and we will trust governments to back our currency. For Bitcoin to succeed, it will have to embrace the one thing that was most intended to avoid: government. Representatives, with our government regulation, with our backing, the Bitcoin can become a stable and profitable currency that companies will be willing to accept, and that investing in will not be a major detriment for our populace. Representatives, it's quite simple. We can't have terrorists laundering money into the United States. We can regulate this. And with this legislation, we will see a stabilization and growth of the prosperity of Bitcoins. Let's move to the future, representatives.
Thank you, Representative. 3 minutes exactly. Questioners, please rise. Representative Niersbach and Hernandez.
Representative, do major financial banks regulate currencies?
Representative, they may do some type of currency monitoring.
Because Bitcoin has no central bank, how can we possibly regulate the currency itself?
Well, as I was saying in my evidence, the Fed said that if we put some regulatory steps in place, they can then act upon those to
However,
regulate.
Representative, why would we invest in a currency if the only bank that received it went bankrupt and lost millions of dollars?
Well, Representative, I believe that that was because of the illegal transactions that were happening. There was attacks upon the bank.
How does this address the illegal transactions that we're only bringing them?
How effective will regulatory terms be in stopping illegal activities?
Well, I believe with new regulation, we'll be able to see this fixed. And as I said in my speech, that the HSBC has suffered a $1.9 billion fine for failing to meet these current regulatory terms. So we have regulations that can work. We just need to expand upon them as a Congress, and I think they can be effective.
What are those regulations?
I don't know exactly what the regulations are now. This one dealt with some smuggling of money laundering, so I don't know exactly how.
So why can't we expand on those regulations?
This bill will expand. This resolution will expand those.
But these
Thank you, Representative. Con speakers, please rise. Representative Gleiser.
Thank you. Judge, your name is Alex Wilson from Union High School. There's plenty of you, so if I just have some eye contact when you're ready. Thank you. When I walk into a bank and I hand the bank cash or a check, they're instant in handling my money. They want my service, and they want the stability of that paper trail that I give them. But when Representative Goldberg goes to the bank and gives them a cryptocurrency, they don't want any of that. They don't want the instability, they don't want the lack of paper trail, and all that does is that leaves them without the cryptocurrency, and that leaves him without the bank service. But throughout this debate, the outrageous amounts of speculations we have throughout cryptocurrencies is just blasphemous in this argument. What we need to see is that this isn't the people-driven currency that Representative Urisman has as beliefs. It's the banks that drive these currencies. And it's the banks that is driving the cryptocurrencies out. So it's for these next two contentions and detailing how the banks have already fought this situation and how the authorities have fought the situation that I urge a negative ballot on this piece of legislation. Now first, when we take a look as to what the banks, specifically in Europe, have done with cryptocurrencies, realize that by passing this legislation would not involve any benefits to our people, rather more instability and more questions for them to answer. Because according to the European Banking Authority of December 13, 2013, when the European banks issued just a simple warning to the people that they do not want cryptocurrencies, the people were hesitant. They immediately dropped out of their cryptocurrencies, allowing for these currencies to provide the instability in the fluctuation of prices. Now, Representative Goldberg stated that we can observe these cryptocurrencies, And while the people can, the banks cannot. And here is why. When you give them cryptocurrencies, something that is digital, they have no way of proof of funds. They have no absolute way to determine where you got that from. And that leaves them questionable. That leaves them hesitant, and that is exactly the banking system that Mr. Niersbach was detecting. That when you give a cryptocurrency, not only is the bank reluctant on that, they have no ways of doing their job. When you look at the for-profit banks, if you give them a digital source, they have no way of getting that fee from that. There's no interest coming from that, and there's no possibility you can give out that loan. And when a consumer chooses to put cryptocurrency to the bank or ask them for that, there's no possibility they benefit either. Because when you have a digital source in the bank, you have no possible way of getting compound interest. There's no way your money is growing, and all you do is leave the fluctuating prices in your bank, resulting in nothing for later on in the years, resulting in huge loss for you, and only the banks look laughing at you the same way they laugh at Mr. Goldberg when he leaves. But Mr. Zions also pointed out the great aspect of what happens when our banking and our money gets committed with fraud. The same thing that Mr. Feltish tried to tackle, but yet was reluctant on. Because leads me to my next contention. Now, when you look at how money is dealt with fraud, it's easy. Bloomberg on February 18, 2012, or 2014, says that the main reason why theft and fraud isn't dealt with cryptocurrencies is because you can't get actual money for it. There's no way of paying your expenses with cryptocurrencies. And while Representative Feltis has you believe that this fraud is the biggest deal that there is with cryptocurrencies, it simply is not. Theft and fraud is not possible to do with cryptocurrencies. You get no monetary value back. So therefore, Representative Moon, analyzing what these cryptocurrencies do and seeing how there's nothing to be dealt with them, I urge a negative balance of this legislation.
Representative, 3 minutes and 5 seconds. Questioners, please rise. Let's see. Representative Zhang and Robbie.
Why won't the passage of this bill increase banks' confidence in cryptocurrency?
The banks have no confidence right now. It started with the European Banking Authority that stated this. The United States and other banks around the world have seen this. And when you see what happened with consumer demand and consumer supply, the fluctuation was just so unstable for the banks to take in that they don't want any part of this.
But wouldn't the passage of this bill allow us to stabilize the currency?
No, the passage of this bill would allow us to add suggestions. It wouldn't do anything towards stabilizing the currency. More speculation on our part.
But if the Fed does take control of this, doesn't that allow for stabilization? Allows us to
Like I said, the Fed wouldn't be taking control of this because they wouldn't buy into our suggestions after realizing.
As our wonderful colleague Benjamin Goldberg has stated, if today's legislation's true purpose is just to investigate the Bitcoin, why is it necessarily detrimental?
Well, first of all, colleagues are already such a harmful adjective you describe right now. Well, there's no point in investigating this cryptocurrency. We see the banks have already investigated. They've proven to us why these cryptocurrencies are useless, and there's no point for us to take more time and more of our efforts into passing this legislation.
So are you saying that it has no potential whatsoever?
It is an unstable potential, a potential that the bank-driven economy does not want to take.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
I move to table this bill.
There's a motion to table the bill. Is there a second? Seeing no second, we will move. Are there any other motions? Seeing none. We move immediately to a pro speech. Any pro speakers?
Motion.
Yes, sir.
I move to table the bill.
There's been another move to table the bill, a second from Representative Goldberg. All in favor of tabling this bill, which requires a simple majority, please raise your hand. Clearly the desire of the chamber.
Motion.
Yes.
Seeing natural breaking debate, I move for a 5-minute recess.
Is there a second?
Second.
I'll say aye.
Aye.
So moved. 5 minutes. The chair will once again open up debate on Bill 201. Is there a sponsor? Thank you. Representative Hernandez, you have the floor. Whenever you're ready.
And my judges. For all those who don't know, the Lincoln-Douglas debate topic this year is talking about whether it is just or unjust in giving political aid or conditional aid to nations in need. Now, we can take what we know from the LD topic and bring it to today's debate, because what we're noticing is that today we are giving conditional aid to the nation of Nicaragua. However, this conditional aid is just And for that, on my following three contentions, that one, people will be displaced in the nation of Nicaragua. Two, we're going to notice that the government needs our help. And lastly, that in past history, such as the Panama Canal, we cannot let history rework itself. But first, let's look at how there will be displaced people in the nation of Nicaragua, and we must give them conditional aid. I turned to the Washington Post on February 26th of 2014, when they stated that the canal would destroy 400, or rather 1 million acres of forest, displacing many native people and many native species alike. So representatives, we see that we must be giving aid to the nation of Nicaragua in their struggle to be helping out these displaced people. Now we see that Nicaragua is in the need of this aid because obviously if they knew the risks of this situation, they wouldn't have even been in agreement with China. But second, looking at the agreement with China and how in street terms it was really sketchy. According to the Nicaraguan Dispatch on June 7th of 2013, they stated that the Nicaraguan government runs a risk in the forming of this canal. In fact, they gave full immunity of legal structure to the HKND group, which is currently going to build a canal in Nicaragua. So if they gave all this immunity to the nation, to China, we're going to notice that obviously they are running a risk. So it is our duty as America to be in full support of Nicaragua in their struggle, as they simply do not know the risks. And lastly, looking historically at the Panama Canal, according to the Smithsonian on February 20th of 2014, they stated that wildlife and people were displaced in the Rama, Guarfina, and Mayunga regions centered near the Panama Canal. So representatives, we cannot let history rework itself, and we must be helping those in need. We must be sending this conditional aid to this country who does deserve it and does not know the risks that they are running into. So in conclusion, representatives, we see that we must be voting for the affirmation of today's resolution, because what we're noticing is that one, the Nicaraguan people are going to be displaced. Second, the government doesn't know the risks it's running into. And lastly, we cannot let history rework itself.
Thank you, Representative. 3 minutes exactly. Speakers for questions, please rise. Representative Hassanein and Zients.
Thank you. How many people are in the affected area are going to be displaced?
Many.
Do you have an exact number?
I do not.
If you don't have an exact number, why do you stipulate that $1 billion is an appropriate amount of money?
I stipulate that $1 billion isn't a correct amount of money.
But
because
why?
Looking historically with Panama Canal, we did not send any conditional aid to that nation, and we have a chance to do that now.
But if we don't know how many people, it could be as little as a few hundred.
Representative, this is a resolution, so we can always change the price depending on the...
So why are we cleaning up for China's mess in the first place is a real question.
You are aware that the resolution says that we will support the construction of the canal, correct?
The resolution does not say that. It
In
says that
the 9th and 10th sentences says we support...
we're going to be sending aid to the people of Nicaragua.
In the 9th and 10th sentences says that we are here assembled to support Nicaragua's plan for a canal to be built in the region.
So obviously, okay, Representative, well, we can obviously still support the Nicaraguan canal being...
Why would you support it if you are aware that it's going to be displacing hundreds and thousands of...
Because we're still, although we're supporting it, we're still going to be sending the conditional aid.
Thank you, Representative. Non-speakers, please rise. Mr. Zients.
That's Representative Zients from Highland Park High School speaking for the first time today. Representative Hernandez seems to be under the impression that in some way, no matter how much monetary aid we give to the people of Nicaragua, we will be able to somehow compensate the disenfranchisement and the removal of the indigenous people from the area. Beyond this, he is in favor of supporting the construction of the canal, although he does acknowledge that it will be running through a pristine area that will destroy its environment. The representatives, I for one cannot support this. No matter how much we attempt to compensate the displacement of these people, and no matter how much we attempt to compensate Nicaragua for the loss of their environments, I do not believe that there's any reason to actually support it, because these things are not something we can support, or not something we can compensate for with monetary aid. Now, to understand this more fully, it's important to understand exactly how the canal is going to be built. For this, I turn to Wired magazine on February 26, of 2014, when they say that the final route to the canal will be going straight through Lake Nicaragua, which covers 6 times the area of LA and is the largest freshwater lake in Central America. Beyond this, it is supplying most of the fresh water for the areas in countries like Nicaragua and around there. It's also used as an irrigation system for the majority of the farms around there, and it's also home to the majority of the freshwater fish and sharks and animals that live in the area. The construction of the canal is supposed to be around 90 feet deep, which is 40 feet deeper than the actual lake. This is a problem because it would cause a major sediment erosion issue, which was pointed out by Wired. Now, this means that the water would no longer be the fresh water that is suitable for drinking, it would no longer be the water that's suitable for irrigation, and it would no longer be water that is suitable for the animals and the fish that are living inside of it. So it's not just an issue that we're destroying part of the environment here, but we're also eliminating one of the largest sources of fresh water for the Nicaraguan people and the people around them. Now, beyond this, it gets worse. Nature magazine in the same month pointed out that the lock system for the lake would be placed on a place where there's seismic activity. For this reason, they explained that this would increase the chances of local flooding into the region and water shortages. They also explained that it would increase the seawater in the local areas, which would cause further detriments to the drinking supply outside of that area. And again, it gets worse. Wired further explained that this would also increase the chance of oil spills in the reef areas, as they said that the canal would increase or the amount of ships that are traveling through one of the biggest shipping routes that goes right through the seafloor marine area, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The increased amount of ships naturally increases the pollution and the amount of oil in the area, which, as they explained, if were to spill, would destroy the reefs with no chance of recovery. Now, again, there's more bad news. Wired further pointed out that this would also increase the introduction of invasive species, specifically the venomous white sneeze-snake, into the area that could not only destroy the local commercial fish, but also could eventually create an area where no other animals or no other fish are living. And the reason why is because the sneeze-snake has no natural predators in the area. It would be a similar event to the Asian carp invasion into the lakes of Illinois, or the lionfish invasion into the coast of Mexico. Now, even worse, we'd have to ask ourselves, how are we going to compensate for all this? And today we propose some sort of monetary compensation. But I ask you as a Congress, is there really any way to compensate for removing someone from their home, from destroying our pristine land, and for knowing that you are supporting something that will destroy one of the last areas that we can truly call Earth? So representatives, today I urge you to vote negation for the protection of our land.
Thank you, Representative. 3 minutes and 9 seconds. Questioners, please rise. Representative Rangianani and Cahotis.
Representative, can the United States control whether or not Nicaragua approves the canal?
No, but what we can do is I'll answer your question now. What we can do is we can oppose the construction of the canal. By supporting this bill, we'd be supporting the construction. If we don't, we can oppose it and voice the fact that we don't want any of these negative consequences to happen.
Hasn't Nicaragua already approved the canal?
I doubt, well, although they've approved it, the actual plans have not been finalized, and there's not a complete assurance that the Chinese company will be able to build it.
Couldn't the funds provided by the United States actually allow plans to be constructed in a more environmentally friendly way?
Even if it could, there's still the problem that you're displacing the indigenous people.
Is anyone besides Wired reporting on the negative effects of this?
So I also cited Nature magazine in the same month, beyond the Smithsonian magazine, and several other scientific publications have again supported it. Wired did an extremely in-depth analysis of this situation.
Now, isn't it Nicaragua's business to decide what they want to do with their plots of land?
It is, absolutely. And all I'm saying is that as a Congress, I don't think we should be supporting that. It doesn't mean we're going to go over Nicaragua.
Aren't there other plots in the United States that we could be possibly looking towards environmental destruction in our own country that's our business to deal with?
Yes, again, all I'm saying is that.
Thank you, Representative. Time for a pro speaker. Speakers, please rise. The generator says Representative Robbie.
Thank you. Representative Robbie from the first time is do not smile when the thumbs up. Preferably a thumbs up from my favorite audience. Representative Zions came up here and highlighted the importance of preserving our own environment and the environment of the world. And he highlighted that as a specific reason to fail today's legislation. But because of the fact that China's involvement is the reason why the canal poses a significant threat, that's precisely the reason why we cannot fail today's legislation. Also, because today's legislation provides economic incentives to the Nicaraguan public and also ensures environmental stability, I urge an affirmative ballot. Now, the first thing that we have to note, which Representative Zions clearly failed to address in his own argument, is that the Nicaraguan people, as well as the Nicaraguan government, will face economic benefits with the onset of today's legislation. So first, let's understand that today's legislation will boost their economy. And the Wired magazine, which did a very in-depth analysis of the situation at hand, of February 26, 2014, reported that Nicaraguan officials claimed that if this canal were to be completed, it would double the national economy, triple the employment rate, and lift close to 400,000 people out of poverty. Now, Representative Zions' primary concern was if we were to pass today's legislation, it would displace many people, and I agree. But that is supplemented with the litany of economic benefits with the passage of today's legislation. We will be able to reimburse these people back because of the fact that we're lifting them out of poverty. We're going to be giving them jobs with the passage of today's legislation to build the canal in the first place, and the revenue gained as a result of the canal would be even more beneficial to the public because the government would be able to provide programs to benefit them in the end. Therefore, your concern is held invalid because of the economic benefits to supplement the disadvantages. Furthermore, you spent a large portion of your speech highlighting the environmental detriment of today's legislation. But the matter of fact is, if the United States gets involved, we can mitigate the damage. So secondly, let's understand that with the passage of today's legislation, we can actually look at how the canal is being made and change it if it does pose an environmental detriment. And the National Geographic of February 20th, 2014 cites that Jorge Fuente Perez, the president of the Nicaraguan Academy of Science, stated that the more China's involved with the building of the canal, the more the canal poses a threat to damaging the environmental aspects of their own country. And that's precisely why we cannot avoid getting involved with the situation. If we don't get involved, then the lake example that you cited will happen. The destruction of trees will also happen. And every other environmental example that you did state which poses a harm will also happen. So the only way to prevent such damage is for the United States to get involved, provide funding, so we can actually look over the construction of the canal and make sure it's actually environmentally beneficial as opposed to detrimental. And because today's legislation poses economic benefits as well as environmental benefits, I urge an affirmative ballot.
Thank you, Representative. 3 minutes and 4 seconds. Questioners, please rise.
Mr. Chair.
Let's see. Representative Froy and Glazer.
Who does the revenue that's made from this canal go to?
The people of Nicaragua.
Does it not go to the Chinese company which the Nicaraguan government contracted to carry out the canal?
If we were to get involved, then we could take a greater...
How are we going to influence the Nicaraguan government's decision to haven't they signed a contract already?
We're giving them monetary funds. We can get involved in that avenue as well.
But how can the United States government take away a contract that a Chinese company signed with the Nicaraguan government?
If we get involved, it would give an incentive for the Nicaraguan government to maybe drop their contract. Thus, we are providing an avenue for...
How does monetary value trump that of contractual terms?
Okay, what I'm saying is that we will provide an incentive for the Nicaraguan government to side with us as opposed to China.
But we're only giving them money. The Hong Kong company is actually giving them more than just that, including
so this could be a first step.
How is our incentive even larger than that?
That's a valid concern, but today's legislation can be the first step in the right direction. We can't just avoid the issue at hand. We actually have to take assertive action.
We're not looking to avoid the situation, but how is it that we should go into political disconcerts with the Hong Kong
when we
company
look at
wants construction?
Thank you, Representative.